And I'd like to just briefly introduce Piotr, who is a professor at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan and former chair of the art history department. In 2012, he was visiting professor here in Berlin at Humboldt University. And in 2009-2010, he was director of the National Museum in Warsaw. Piotr, please join the stage. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take this one.
No, I didn't do it.
Take this one.
Thank you very much. And as we agreed with Maria, that will be a different talk than Homi Bhabha's before, and it's very hard to speak after him. And this is less academic talk, more a sort of manifesto. And as such, no discussion is scheduled afterwards. And sorry about this, but this is a practical consequences of Rising Manifesto. Sorry. And agoraphilia is a drive to enter public space, to desire to participate in that space, to shape public life. Agoraphobia is something different. It is opposite, indeed a sort of escape from the public, not only giving up the desire to shape reality, but in fact to pass such a right on the hands of tyranny, totalitarianism, autocracy, imperialism, etc. In one word, to them who are against democracy. We who are coming from the post-communist parts of Europe, as I come from Poland, supposed to live in democratic system, not all of us, of course. Although many of us still feel that the system is not fully democratic. Agoraphobia is seen in Poland, Hungary, the Balkan countries, etc. Of course, it is also seen in the West, or in the former West, so to speak. Agoraphilia, when applied to the analysis of art produced in the countries of post-communist Eastern Europe after 1989, provides a key to the description of the region's artistic culture. I'm interested in the artist's impact in creating agora, shaping new democracy in Eastern Europe, as well as agoraphobic strategies of limiting political and social participation in public sphere. The new post-communist states possessed various methods for introducing those policies, but also the artists were so much involved in such wars. We used to call them critical artists, since their deconstructive strategies show the new post-communist mechanism of restrictions and oppressions based on religion, nationalism, homophobia, body issues, etc. I'm absolutely aware that the artists really did and still doing a great job in those regions. If someone remembers the right-wing politicians, especially in Poland, attacks on such artists as Katarzyna Kozyra, Zbigniew Libera, Robert Rumas, Piotr Duklański, and institutions as the Center for Contemporary Art in Warsaw and Zachęta Gallery in the same city, especially Dorota Nieznarska lawsuit in Gdańsk, he and she gets to know what I mean. It was really a hard time in Poland, but on the other hand, art was at the front pages of the press and media. After a couple of years, some of the right-wing parties, as the League of Polish Families, disappeared from the political landscape, and others, which remain, realize that agoraphilic art is even stronger afterwards than it used to be before. The turning point of such cultural wars between the artists and intellectuals on the one hand, and the right-wing politicians on the other, was the court in Gdańsk after 10 years. The court in Gdańsk after 10 years found Dorota Nieznarska not guilty for abusing religious sentiments and unveiled system of censorship. Now, however, I see that the situation is not so simple as 20 years ago, and the post-communist condition is a part of the global mechanism. We, in East Europeans, are not alone in the world, and the post-communist condition is not limited to the former Eastern Europe only. After more than 20 years from the time when communist regime collapsed and the later e-unification, we need something different than the national or even regional agoraphilia. We need actually the global agoraphilia. And let me develop this argument. There is no democracy in any one specific country. Because of globalization, each country is tied up with another one. Even Hungary, democracy is in danger, and it is in danger. It means that in Poland could be in danger too soon at its running. Right now, we are already hearing some voices that Poland should follow Hungary and the Fidesz government, and Warsaw must be the second Budapest. In no country democracy would be fulfilled, realized, if in Russia some artists from the group Pussy Riot are still in Gulag, and if in China autocratic system still remains, and the world players, both Western and Eastern states, are so much afraid about their business. How artists in Slovakia or Czech Republic, in France, Sweden or Croatia can be free and enjoy democracy if AYY is jailed in his own country. Last summer, I participated at the Seha Congress in Nuremberg, and just to explain, Seha is the oldest and the largest worldwide association organizing every 4 years the World Congresses in art history. The next Congress will be held in China. Despite of many protests have been issued among the Seha members, even the whole national sections. How it would look like. To imagine it, let me recollect some papers given in Nuremberg by Chinese art historians. One of them was talking about the iconography of the Tiananmen Square. She started from the ancient time and finished in 1970. Being asked why she did not mention the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989 and its iconography, that was the subject of this talk, simply replied that she is not interested in it. The other Chinese speaker was talking on the above-mentioned AYY, arguing that the artist is responsible for exploitation of the cheap labor in China. If those papers might be understood as the preview of the next Seha Congress in Beijing, it doesn't look good in terms of democracy and especially free speech. The same could be applied to the Middle East, Africa, and other places, since democracy is not only a legal issue, but also maybe first of all the moral one. Of course, in the most European countries, we have free election, but it's not enough to call those countries democratic if they legitimize autocratic systems elsewhere in the name of economic profits. All of that simply means that we need global agoraphilia. We need artists, art critics, scholars, art historians, curators, and other cultural activists to do their job on the global scale, as they did before here, not here, but there, in post-communist Europe some years ago. Just frankly speaking, 1,000 or 2,000 meters from here. I'm sure that many people are quite aware about those processes and are going to take this challenge and aim at what Boris Groys, actually at the occasion of the 11th Istanbul Biennale in 2009, called global politeia. Something as the global and the alter globalis, I would say, developing your argument. At the same time, constitution, alter globalis constitution, to protect the human right, the labor, simply to create worldwide democracy. That was published in the journal along with this Biennale. We observe that the capital has no limits, no border control, and floats from place to place for the benefit of global companies and enterprises, but definitely not the global employees, and who are sometimes, but not always, protected by the nation states only, but not on the broader global scale. The same with democracy, which is sometimes, and not always, protected by the nation-state institutions, but still not on the global scale. Global politeia would bring to mind a question of how to provide a framework of leading the multitude and to create counter-empire in terms of Michael Hart and Antonio Negri. In one word, global politeia is a goal of agoraphilic activities. This time of artists, curators, art critics, activities leading to the constitution of global international democracy. And the Biennale or other mega exhibitions might be a platform on which such processes would be done. Although we used to overestimate the role of art and art institutions, in reality, nevertheless, many people share the idea that the world exhibitions are the right place to perform democratic activities, something I call here global agoraphilia. Just few examples. Ranjin Houskot, who was here a few minutes ago, claims, referring to the 7 biennial Gwangju in South Korea, that low-budget exhibitions as such could serve as the biennials of resistance. Thomas Phillips, referring to the Dakar Biennial, Dakar, argues that it could be one of the zones of contacts, which actually was the title of the first Sydney Biennale, 2006. Even Charles Escher, writing on the third Havana Biennale in 1989, in the country which is definitely not democratic for decades, sees there a sort of possibility of the global multicultural democratic form. The most, however, developed argument for the idea of mega exhibitions could be that mega exhibitions could be counter-hegemonic or counter-normative, and as such, the right place of global agoraphilia is given by Onkui Enwetsor. It's worth to come closer to his argument. The framework of his way of thinking is a concept of diasporic public sphere. There was a quotation. Drawn from Arjun Apuradai's writings, it means more or less that global hybrid cultures question many traditional oppositions, that is, between center and periphery, local and global, national and regional, etc. In one word, the sphere of cultural translation and negotiations. Onkui Enwetsor is arguing that biennials and other large international exhibitions, thus, are places of encounter between many different cultures. They are doing so, and they are visible through the domain of spectacle or spectacularization of art and culture. This process used to give artists a strong voice and provides a great opportunity to the worldwide distribution of their products. The receivers of the messages are not necessarily professionals, rather the general audience from around the world, thanks to tourism, mass communications, etc., living also, according to him, in diasporic cosmopolitan sphere. Finally, these agoraphilic attitudes are spreading out and can influence people, eventually to create global politeia. However, there are some who do not share such a theory or even question its premises. George Baker, in his polemical contribution to the issue, is arguing that the huge international exhibitions are too big, and people usually are not able to see them, at least not the whole event. He is skeptical that mega exhibitions address the general audience, rather mostly the art world itself. He also disagrees that diaspora can be seen as the framework of huge international exhibitions. It is indeed the global phenomena, however, not at the same level as the exhibition business. The former is a challenge to the latter, since the latter is a sort of Western strategy to keep its hegemony rather than to subvert it. Finally, Baker doubts that the spectacle could help to distribute rebellious attitudes. Rather, it disarms them according to the logic of the society of spectacle described by Guy Debord. His arguments against mega international exhibitions organized around the world, such as many by Niels Documenta, etc., Charles Joaquin Barrientos, who sees in such events a process of re-Westernization rather than a critique of the hegemony of the West. My own position is closer to Enwetzer than to skeptical Baker. However, let me repeat, we should not overestimate the role of art exhibitions in creating international global democracy. I'm aware, however, that thousands of people visiting Documenta or some by Niels, as for example Istanbul by Niels, I mentioned above, are learning a critical way of thinking, although not all of them, of course. And this is one channel of global agoraphilia. To illustrate this argument, I would like to point here the 7 Berlin Biennale curated by Artur Zmieski and Joanna Warsza last year, and a very striking title, Forget Fear, who made 2 simultaneous gestures. On the one hand, this is the first, they neutralized the meaning of our theory understood in terms of self-ruling activities. And this is the second, they instrumentalized, this is very important, instrumentalized art institutions on the other in order to use their symbolic capital in more or less direct political actions. I choose this by Niels since, many people from Berlin, of course, remember the debate which was conducted along this Biennale. The former, the instrumentalization of art institution, of course, is nothing new. The first one, the neutralization or the meaning of art theory is nothing new. It comes from 1968 revolt, theorized, among others, by Victor Bergin in his book The End of Art Theory, published in the following years, and showed this process quite clearly. It was picked up later by Hans Belting while observing the end of art history, what means the end of autonomous sphere usually separated from other knowledge, such as especially cultural anthropology. Developing that way of thinking and observing contemporary art scene, he has been, Belting, arguing that the global art is at the same time both post-historical and post-historical since Western art historical methodology is not useful in analyzing, and post-ethnic since the same we can say about Western ethnography. The latter, the now instrumentalization of art institution, the latter characteristics dealing with the instrumentalization of the institution is even more striking and has nothing to do with this 1968 tradition. It's more contemporary. There's also Hans Belting, who is arguing that those global institutions, as by Niels, are showing not art as such, rather the world through it. So not art, but the word is shown in these exhibitions and that the institutions and that shows, exhibitions. The word, the global word in that case, is in their interest rather than the particular form of art. It was especially seen in Berlin, where there were many political activists involved, and not only professional artists, and as it was in the previous events. They simply used or instrumentalized the institution to make visible their own issues, namely the voice for global politeia. Let's come closer to this exhibition. And there's a little bit analytical arguments put to the manifesto. Artur Zmijewski, in his statement, made quite clear that he had what he had in mind while curating the Biennale. He is against artists understood as object makers, against curators administrating them, against art which is for art's sake and not changing the world. He is against art activities understood as raising questions for whom no one even tries to answer. He is saying that we need answers, and more, even more, we need political actions changing reality. In one word, we do not need art that represents politics. Rather, we need politics that can change the world using artistic methods. This is his idea. It's quite an agoraphilic statement. I think the point of this program was made by a friend of him, another well-known Polish artist, namely Paweł Althammer, who suggested that instead of sending to the zones of conflicts military troops, the artists should be sent there. They are, according to Althammer, much more effective in solving problems using paint, brushes, pencils, performing or talking to the people than soldiers with guns. Being asked in the interview, who is he, who is Althammer, who is he, a doctor, a therapist, a social worker, he explained that being called an artist, and I quote him, is merely a camouflage that helps me, or him, to sidestep the accusation that I am crazy, end of quote. A good point, maybe. He pointed at the same time the idea that art can more, since it has a sort of licentia poetica, to make crazy things, which could be finally more effective than the so-called realpolitik. In the biennial book, this book, Forget Fear, under the above-mentioned title for Forget Fear, there are a couple of examples of art methodology being used in the real public space. One of them is a story of the mayor of Bogota, Antanas Mokus, who confirmed on his own example that such methods are more useful in fighting with the city crimes than the police troops. It is quite striking that in the city he was governing with those unusual methods such as performance, visual communication, distributing slogan objects, or joyful plays. The crime has been reduced. This concept does not fall out from of the blue. Some years ago, Artur Zmijewski wrote a manifesto, Applied Social Arts. In defining his program, Zmijewski starts with several negative assumptions. One of them is art's shameful adventure with propaganda, namely its involvement in party politics of the fascist as well as communist totalitarian states. This adventure has engendered a lack of enthusiasm for political engagement in art and has given rise to the dominance of autonomy as the ideology of art's purity or art for art's sake. The second negative point of reference is provided by the dialectic relationship between rebellion and responsibility, two concepts that describe art's alienation. Responsibility provides a rationale for art's engagement or its usage in many spheres of social life. However, such use does not undermine its autonomy. By contrast, rebellion provides a safety valve that prevents art's usage by various power structures and grants artists the independence. But such dual role does not overcome artist alienation. On the contrary, it reinforces it by branding him as ignorant and illiterate. The artist is someone who cannot be taken seriously within many areas of social life. He may produce knowledge and politics, but does not control his own products, which consequently are not taken seriously by the society. Moreover, the experts in particular fields do not find the art language persuasive, and hence they do not respect it. It is too artistic, which means that its meanings are related to something other than knowledge or politics. That is why politicians and academics treat the artist as ignorant and illiterate. The next negative reference is provided by an understanding of art as a form of viral infection. This understanding conceives art as something that interrupts normal functioning of a society. It is something that creates infections that often cannot be controlled. However, Chmielewski argues that this does not have to and should not to be the case. He proposes replacing the metaphor of a virus and with that of function that calculates means and methods of work in order to achieve a desired effect. Art that uses science as a model will produce knowledge in controlled manner. How such a thing could be accomplished? Chmielewski provides several theoretical perspectives. Above all, he claims that art autonomy should be instrumentalized and should no longer function as the guarantee of ideological purity. It should become one of the tools available to the artist. The next step must involve the artist's entry into the other fields, especially science and politics, as an equal partner. This would mean that criteria used to evaluate art would have to be adjusted to fit the requirements of science, explanation, or politics, effectiveness. The frame of reference would not be provided by art history, but by knowledge or science. This would also mean that some concepts traditionally used to evaluate art practice would have to change their function. For example, autonomy would not signify extreme individualism, but freedom of choice. Originality would provide evidence of innovation rather than complete novelty. Obscurity would announce difficulty in communication rather than a lack of legibility. Risk, which is associated in art history with uselessness, would become useful. As a result, art could become useful and effective in explaining the transforming reality. This is the program of Agoraphilia. And this program Chmielewski wanted to test not only as an artist, but also as a curator of the seventh Berlin Biennale. On the exhibition in Kunstwerke, there were many things clearly justifying global agoraphilia. The most visible, perhaps, was the Occupy movement incorporated into the Biennale structure. The presence here was rather symbolic than political. The real action, however, was an appearance of the Occupy Museum movement from New York in Berlin Pergamon Museum demanding to give back all of art pieces collected by the museum to the countries of their origins. There are also some documentaries showing some real political actions, as for example breaking the newsroom, showing different demonstrations from around the world. Another one, Focus Belarus, cartoons designed by Marina Neprushkina and smuggled to Belarus, recently the most or the hardest regime in Europe. In Berlin, the aim of this project was to inform the people about the situation in Belarus. But in Belarus, where these cartoons have been smuggled, where the situation is quite well known, it aimed at forgetting fear, supporting the political opposition, fighting with the dictatorship, but also raising a question of the future. That is, democracy, which is not necessarily should go together with neoliberal economic system. Maybe the most unusual event in the framework of Biennale was the New World Summit, organized by Dutch artist Jonas Staal. It was something as a terrorist congress. However, not real terrorists took part in it, but the legal representatives of organizers of organizations recognized by the US and the EU as terrorists. The issue here was a question why some of them are recognized as such, and what is the real purpose of it, both in America and Europe. What does it mean to the entire world? Some speakers showed that many groups recognized as terrorists do fight for democracy against oppression of state terror, and the above-mentioned recognition as terrorist organization is a function of politics of hegemonic countries rather than real political goals of particular organization. The most striking were examples of some repressions that people are facing, only because they try to help people to make their lives better. For example, 2 guys from Texas are jailed for 65 years, just because they wanted to create the Holy Land Foundation in order to provide medical aid and to help to build hospitals in Gaza. Since Hamas is the legal and democratic elected representative of Palestinians living there, the foundation was in contact with it, this obviously, and that was a background of the lawsuit and sentenced them. It is obvious that such a Congress was possible under the sponsorship of art institution only, bearing a particular licentia poetica and providing symbolic capital to distribute its ideas. It is a very good example of a process of instrumentalization or instrumentalizing art and art institutions in order to achieve political goals. The New World Summit was not the only Congress organized in the framework of Biennale. The other one I would like to mention here was the meeting of Jewish Renaissance movement in Poland, organized by Israeli artist Yael Bartena. She is quite well known in Poland because of her films showed even in the official exhibition in Polish pavilion in Venice Biennale, the 2011. Whether the appeal of returned Jews to Europe and Poland in particular, when 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazi, including more than 3 million Polish Jews, and this is almost entire pre-war Jewish population. So, whether this appeal is realistic or not, this is a different question. But it is definitely a strong impact to the discussion of the absence in the country. On the occasion of this meeting, Sławomir Sierakowski, a leader of Krytyka Polityczna, political critique, the journal and the left-wing movement popular among mostly, if not only, among young intelligentsia, proposed the global constitution something exactly what was mentioned before, the global politeia, where one of the crucial issues is a question of global citizenship, which would mean a right to live in one's own home. Why Jews, after years of living in diaspora, finally found their homes, whether it is comfortable or not, this is a different question, Palestinians lost it. The symbolic contribution to the right to come back was the key of return, of course, a large key made in Palestine and brought to Berlin in order to show in the yard of Kunstwerke a symbol of the keys people are keeping in refugee camps in the memory of the lost homes in 1948, when they were forced to leave them. But the key of return and Gilbert Tena's project of returning Jews are showing that such actions are still symbolic and not real, unfortunately. We hope, of course, that Palestinians finally will come back to their homes, and at least some of Jews will migrate to Poland. But nevertheless, the meaning of those projects is a utopia. However, we need a utopia, which is not necessarily a place of nowhere, but a guidepost where to go. This is what Agoraphilia needs. Maybe more realistic, or at least optimistic, is what Immanuel Wallenstein suggests. Instead of a utopia, he is talking of a utopistics. Generally speaking, it means that the utopia is just an idea, while the utopistics is the analysis of social, political, and economical situation in order to create the most possible processes taking place in the future. In other words, while the first is an idealist vision of the future, the latter is the real possibility based on scientific research of the so-called world system in the longue durée perspective. He is arguing, thus, that now we are at the turning point of the world economy, facing the end of capitalism and emerging something new. How it would look like, what it could be, there is, of course, not a definite answer for that. Somehow it depends on us. It means that not only we can expect the new system as better and more democratic, but if we do like such a system, we have to work in order to help it to come true. Although the distinction between a utopia, idealism, and utopistics, rationalism, is not entirely clear for me, and all his argument, especially when he is talking about the future, looks speculative, I'm sure that we can do something in order to improve democracy. Definitely more than just to vote every couple of years for some politicians. Although I'm not going to overestimate the role of art in a process to create the global politeia, I'm convinced that the global agoraphilia is a strategy or attitude or a method to create art, as well as art events, small and large exhibitions, both local and global, is an important means to achieve the new world system, more democratic, more fair, equitable, etc. In one word, I believe more in artists than military troops, especially those who share the idea of global agoraphilia. Thank you very much.